Good evening. This is Pastor Bob Uzzle from the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Corsicana, Texas. Hope everybody has been having a good day. Today's April 30th, 2020. We're down to the end of another month, and we don't know how much longer we have of this pandemic, but I encourage everybody to hold on and keep your faith in God. He'll get us through it. We don't know how long it'll take, but it's not going to last forever, and God will make a way somehow. Tonight I want to talk about an article that I had published a couple of years ago, and back in the 1980s, I did, in the fall of 86, I started PhD studies at Baylor in the area of world religions. And I had in the fall of 86, I had a lecture course entitled Religions of Antiquity in the Near East. It was taught by Dr. Dwight Baker. He's died several years ago at the age of 91. Dr. Baker had been for 27 years a missionary in Israel, and then 9 years in India. He was a very gifted man, quite a scholar, and I learned a lot from him. But for that course, I did a paper on the Bektashi order of Dervishes, a very interesting Sufi. The Sufis are the mystics of Islam, and I had studied about them before, and I was wanting to do some in-depth research, and I gathered so much information that I just couldn't put it all in one paper. So during the spring, I got permission to take a different approach and to write a second paper for a different class he was teaching. This was a seminar on Judaism and Islam. I had several other world religions courses as well as other courses before I completed my PhD in 1995. But it goes back to 1870. By the way, the reason I've chosen April 30th for this presentation, because something very significant happened 33 years ago. I was working on this paper on the history of the Bektashi order of Dervishes. It was due on May 1st, and I was waiting on some information that I needed to complete the paper and put it in its final form. That information arrived in the mail on April 30th, just one day before the paper was due. It came all the way from Turkey, from a brother Aki, from the Supreme Council of Turkey, from the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. And it was just what I needed. And so I wrote those two papers back in the 80s. I put them in the files, and I look at them from time to time. And I said, I need to put these together and publish them someday. And of course, with the internet and everything, a lot of things developed. And finally, 30 years later, I got around to editing them, combining information. By the way, they were written on a typewriter. And so it took considerable work to get them on a computer and to get them upgraded, plus adding new information. On any subject, 30 years, a lot of new information comes to your attention. So you got to keep revising and updating to stay on top of things. And Alexei Tenebr's research chapter, the Phylaxis Society, published my article on the Shriners in the Bektashi order of Dervishes 33 years ago. I firmly believe, and I'll always believe, that was more than coincidental. There was divine providence that actually arrived in the mail one day before the paper was due. Since 1872, there's been a legend of a historical link between these two organizations. the ancient Arabic order, Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, which is now known as Shrine International, and this heterodox Islamic sect known as the Bektashi order of Dervishes. Now, heterodox as opposed to orthodox, different, not in line with what standard. If you know anything about Christianity, you know you have Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Protestantism. Protestantism is a big umbrella covering everything from high church Anglicanism all the way to holiness and Pentecostal groups and everything in between. And there's a lot of different variations today in Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. The same is true of Islam. The two main divisions are Sunni and Shiite. And sometimes you hear those terms in the media. All Muslims believe that there is one God whose proper name is Allah. All Muslims believe in the idea of Muhammad being the prophet of God, the last and universal messenger. And the Holy Quran has a special place, but the interpretations vary. There were the caliphs that were the successors to Muhammad. According to the Sunnis, who are Orthodox Muslims, the biggest portion of the world, you got Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman are the first three. Then the fourth is his son-in-law, Ali. The Shiites, which are especially strong in Iran, reject the first three caliphs and claim that Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, who was married to his daughter Fatima, was the true heir in the line of the imams and all the ayatollahs come through this line of Ali. But there's other factions as well, some that are Sunnis and Shiites would say are not even true Muslims. And there's parallels. Many Christians would say, for example, that Mormons are not true Christians. Mormons would beg to differ with you on that point. And so some Muslims would say, we are true Muslims. Say, no, you're not. So you're always going to have some difference of opinion there on who represents the truth and who is a heretic, who is an apostate. But I'll say this, the Bektashi dervishes, you may have seen on TV sometimes, the whirling dance they do, the mystical trance and all of that. That's very interesting. But they're about as far from Sunni orthodoxy as you can get. But the Shriners, there's no really direct connection, but they like to play like there is. It was founded by Dr. Walter Fleming, a physician, and Billy Florence, an actor. There was a place in New York City. I've been told that the building is no longer standing. It was called Knickerbocker Cottage. And it was in the years after the Civil War, there was really living it up, the preservation of the Union. And there was a craze went on in New York City about the number 13. And there was a group of men who were Freemasons. They would meet every day at Knickerbocker Cottage for lunch. There'd have to be 13 of them exactly. If there was only 12, they'd have to cancel. If 14 showed up, one would have to leave. It had to be 13, no more, no less. They'd sit down to lunch at exactly 12:13. And out of this club, many of them, they were Freemasons. They decided to have a fun organization. And initially, they restricted the membership to Freemasons of the 32nd degree Scottish Rite and Knights Templar of the York Rite. In the year 2000, membership in the shrine was opened up to all Master Masons. The Scottish Rite and York Rite requirements were eliminated. But Fred Vandeventer wrote an interesting book called The Parade to Glory, The Shriners and Their Caravan to Destiny. and he described a mythical bond between the two orders. He said he realized there's no historical basis for this. The most prominent, powerful of the orders is the Bektashi, or nobles of the mystic shrine. Its offshoots and satellites are the Dorkaway, Cowan, Abdel Qadir, El Baghdadi, and Isawai, similar in obligation and purpose. These are not altogether political religious societies, as generally supposed in the outside world. The Bektashi, or nobles of the mystic shrine, as is known in America, is of necessity divested of the inconsistent Islamic dogmas, and its ritual adapted to the consistencies of Christian institutions and American laws. It's destined to become a powerful order here in America. And it was on June 1st of 1893. You know, back in 1872, Mecca Temple in New York was chartered as the first of the temples of what became Shrine International. And they developed temples in various parts of the country, but at the time of the World's Columbian Exposition, World's Fair, at Apollo Hall on State Street, an African American attorney named John G. Jones, 13 other black Masons, claimed they were initiated into the mystic shrine by Ali Rofelt Pasha of the Ground Council of Arabia, who was attending the exposition. There's a lot of theories on who he was, if such a person ever existed. My late friend Joe Walks, I served on the Imperial Historical Committee that contributed to the book that was on the Shrine history, The Pillar of Black Society, that was published in 1993 to mark the Shriners Centennial. And there's different theories on how they came up with the name. I'm not going to go into all that now, but I was of the belief that Jones might have been taken in by a degree peddler posing as an Arab. There was all kinds of Arabic and Persian and Turkish motifs there at this international event, with the Midway, which noted for introducing the belly dance to America, the streets of Cairo, and we'll talk about the fair itself at a later time. But they also had a Parliament of World Religions that met there at the time in connection with the fair. A fascinating event. And the only representative of Islam at the fair was Alexander Russell Webb, an American convert who had taken the name Muhammad Webb. He gave 2 speeches at the Parliament. And there were some other speeches given, some related to the Middle East and Christian missions among Muslims and other things of this nature. But it was on the 14th of September, 1893, that the Reverend Dr. George Washburn, president of Robert College in Constantinople, Turkey, that's a city now known as Istanbul. You may have heard the song, Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Been a long time gone on Constantinople. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks. Interesting line in there. It says that every girl in Constantinople lives in Istanbul, not Constantinople. So, fellas, if you have a date in Constantinople, she'll be waiting in Istanbul. Well, Robert College was a Christian school in a Muslim country. And Dr. Washburn was an interesting man. He was a missionary there. He gave an interesting speech, The Points of Contact and Contrast Between Christianity and Mohammedanism. Well, what's more significant to me is in his autobiography, he wrote that in the summer of 1893, I went to America to attend the Parliament of Religions at the Columbian Fair. I spoke on Mohammedanism and Christianity, and so far successful in presenting a fair treatment of the former that no complaint was made of it in Constantinople, although Orthodox Mohammedans naturally would not accept the address as a whole. And while some of my Turkish friends were here received it with favor. While an American, after my return, I was drawn into public and private discussion in regard to the secret society known as the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine of Mecca, which professes to be affiliated with the Mohammedan order of the Bektashi Dervishes, some of whom in Constantinople are near neighbors and special friends of mine. It is true that Orthodox Mohammedans look upon the Bektashis as a heretical sect, but they are Mohammedans. And by the way, to a devout Muslim today, Mohammedan is not an acceptable term. They say that's like calling Christianity St. Paulianism. And so that was common uses in the 19th century, but no reputable scholar would use the term Mohammedan today. But we got to keep it in the historical context. If this American society is what it professes to be, its members are Mohammedans who do not live up to their faith. For the first duty of a Mohammedan is confess his faith and defend it. It is a fraud. If it is a fraud and parody on Mohammedanism, it is an insult to a great religion, which is a shame to America. The Bektashis here are still in doubt as to which it is, and so am I. But he apparently encountered the Shriners while in America. Dr. Fleming, Walter Fleming was a physician, and Billy Florence was an actor, the Jack Benny of his day. And he allegedly went to a play in Marseille, France. And at the end of the play, there was an initiation into a secret society. And he brought back some notes to Dr. Fleming, who used them in writing the ritual for the Shriners. And there are many references to Islam. Some Muslims consider the shrine to be a mockery of the Muslim faith. And there are Freemasons of various faiths, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others. Only religious requirement is belief in a supreme being. And but the vast majority of Shriners are not Muslims. One time I asked a fellow Shriner if he had read much of the Quran. He admitted he probably hadn't even read a line for the Quran. He said maybe he saw a copy of it. And the Islam has strict rules against alcohol and pork. And so many Muslims would be uncomfortable at a Shriner's barbecue for obvious reasons. And there's no direct connection, but it adds a cultural, interesting, colorful mythology to the Shriners. But the Bektashi itself, founded around 1250 AD, and it was characteristic of the frontier life that heresies of all sorts received welcome among the common people. Both Christian and Mohammedan heresies flourished. Religion among the common people thus became, as Muslims and Christians on the frontiers mingled, a very mixed affair. It is out of that mixture of all sorts of elements, Christian, Mohammedan, and pagan, that the Bektashi and affiliated Kizilbash sectaries developed. And this is from John Kingsley Burge's book on the Bektashi order of Dervishes that was published in 1937. In every religion, you find a gap between established orthodoxy and popular piety. You want to know something about folk Catholicism, for example? Don't go to the Vatican. Go to a rural village in Mexico and see what is meaningful to the people there. Dr. Harvey Cox, who retired from Harvard Divinity School, described the experience. He is like myself. Well, actually, I got my inspiration from him. Fascinated by the figure of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The Our Lady of Guadalupe was the apparition of the Virgin Mary appearing to Juan Diego in December of 1531, and a lot of interesting stories about that. But Dr. Cox visited among some folk Catholics in Mexico. In this one home, they had a statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Next to her was a Spanish conquistador. And he asked, "Who's that?" "Oh, that's her husband, our Lord of Guadalupe." His response was, "I thought Our Lady was a virgin." "Well, that's what the church says, but we in the village know the truth." So there's always a gap between established orthodoxy and popular piety. The same thing among the Muslim clerics in Mecca. You find among the rank and file grassroots Muslims appeal to certain mystical sects. And there was the famous Haji Bektash Veli, traditional founder of the Bektashi order. Scholars debate whether he ever lived or not. If one accepts his historicity, it's difficult to separate fact from fantasy. According to tradition, he lived from 1248 to 1337 AD. They believe that he was a direct descendant of Prophet Muhammad, from whom he learned external science. He received esoteric knowledge, including the power to work miracles, which is the sign of sainthood in Islam, from the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, Ali. Evidence indicates that Bektash was an historical person who came to Asia Minor in the 13th century, settled in an area known as Kair Sahir, in a village that was later named for him, combined Muslim teachings with a system of mysticism influenced by the Central Asian Sui Ahmed Yasavi. He became quite popular, initiating many disciples and developing a ritual involving the use of the 12 candles and ceremonial meal and dance. He established practice of lighting candles at the graves of saints. He commanded the apostles to wear a distinctive headpiece, and before he died, he sent them in various directions to share his teachings. And a review of Bektashi literature reveals good-humored contempt for the intellectual and moral inconsistencies of Sufi or Sunni Orthodox teachings, especially about divine judgment. The Bektashis teach the idea of the associations between Allah, Muhammad, and Ali, although they deny that they're speaking in terms of a trinity. And associating anything with Allah is shirk, which is that's the greatest sin of all in Orthodox Islam. And they have a type of ritual, which might be compared in some ways, though it's not exactly like Christian communion. It involves bread, wine, and cheese. Orthodox Islam forbids alcohol. So there's some variations here. But I like this story that describes the Bektashi attitude. In one story, there's an account of a trip at sea in which a terrible storm arises, frightening the passengers who, in great anxiety, say their prayers, repent from their sins, and pray God for deliverance. The Bektashi, however, sits in the corner, calmly smoking his pipe, showing no sense of fear or worry. When the storm subsides and the ship lands, one of the passengers, who has marveled at the calmness of the Bektashi, asks him, "When we were all in such terror, you continued smoking your pipe as if nothing was happening. Were you not afraid?" "Why should I be, my child?" answered the Bektashi. "Didn't you see that there was nothing but a board between you and death?" "Yes, I saw that," replied the Bektashi. "But on land, there isn't even that much." And A Bektashi is instructed by the pronunciations may not be the best, Murshid, his spiritual master. The role is exercised by the Baba or Sheikh of the Teki where the initiation is conducted. And Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, plays a very major role in Bektashi worship. They often quote the statement attributed to Muhammad, I am the city of knowledge, Ali is the gateway. And sinlessness and divine authority are attributed to Ali, also to his descendants, the 12 Imams, whose line will be climaxed with the coming of the Mahdi, the divine ruler. The Bektashis, like the more devout Shiites, expect the Mahdi to appear with Jesus and Elijah at the end of time. And Sufism, like I say, is mystical Islam. And there's a number of varieties of Sunnis and Sufis. It was Al-Ghazali who brought about a synthesis that allowed Sufis to remain within the fold of Islam. He was another very interesting person, but some of the Sufi writers were definitely considered heretical by the Orthodox Islamic perspective. But they stress the idea of oneness and realize in divine reality. They have various degrees of initiation. And on the fringe of the organization stands the Ashik, who is attracted by and feels a certain loyalty to the order, but he's not yet been initiated. He properly visits the Teki, talks with the Baba and its members, possibly listens to Bektashi music and singing. He's then regarded as a candidate for full membership. As the Ashik is technically not yet a member, what properly can be called the first degree of Muhib, a title conferred on one who has passed through the ceremonies of confession of faith and assembly. And prior to initiation, the candidate must be well recommended to the Baba by two Bektashis in good standing. And so they go through this mystical initiation rite, and they have various confessions and ablutions to make. And the number 12 is a mystical number for Bektashis. The candidate always incurs the penalty of 12 punishments should he fail to keep his obligation. And Freemasons can relate to that, I think. The second degree is that of Dervish, which involves further commitment to the self to follow professionally the religious life. And for this ceremony, the candidate, like the entered apprentice Mason, is neither naked nor clad. The ritual includes the boring of the ear of the in some cases, they bore the ear for the ear ring as a token of the vow of celibacy, but most Bektashis are not celibate. That's only a special group within them. And as I've said before, and I'm not knocking Catholicism, a beautiful system of dogma, many things good to be said about it. But if celibacy worked as well as it's supposed to, you wouldn't have all this big problem of abusive priests. And, some people, for various reasons, the various religious traditions have monastic orders, monks and nuns. Islam is no exception. There are celibate and there are married Bektashis. The third degree is Baba or Sheikh. By special ceremony, the dervish is elevated to this position, which he serves as head of a Teki, Murshid, to seekers of instruction and initiation, and pastor to the wider flock of the families, friends of the Dervishes who looked to him as a friend, priest, and advisor. And the Bektashi Khalifa is equivalent to a Christian bishop. He ordains babas and exercises a supervisory relationship on the work of the district. All Khalifas are supervised by the Dede, who might be described as the Bektashi Pope. And they celebrate New Year's Day on the 9th of March, the birthday of Ali, the 10th day of Muharram. In Shiite Islam, which they have an affinity for, Muharram is a very sacred occasion. You see, Ali's had two sons, Hassan and Hussein. Hassan was poisoned. Hussein was beaten out of the caliphate. And when he sought to regain his rightful authority, he was killed on the plains of Karbala. The martyrdom of Hussein is remembered at Muharram. And the Bektashis are heterodox. They ignore Islamic rules like abstaining from alcohol and pork, the veiling of women. They don't face Mecca when they pray. They believe the divine spirit is manifested through various individuals. They revere Jesus as well as Muhammad as a vessel of the divine spirit, more than just a prophet. And the Bektashi order was a major factor in the spread of Islam among the native Christian population of Rumelia. And they were associated at one time with the Ottoman military unit known as the Janissaries. And then they got involved in a movement known as the Young Turks that brought about the overthrow of the Ottoman Sultanate. It's certainly definite that a number of Young Turks were members of the Bektashi order. And there was definitely an overlapping in membership among the Bektashis and the Freemasons. Many Islamic countries have banned Freemasonry, but Freemasonry has managed to survive in Turkey through different regimes they've had there. But following the triumph of the Young Turks, a suspicion of secret societies developed. The Turkish ruler Mustafa Kemal, better known as Ataturk, and many of his associates saw potential dangers in permitting belief in the supernatural powers of holy men, whether living or dead. For a time, there was hope on the part of some. The Dervish orders were banned. The Bektashi were exempt. And there was some laws that were passed, but suffice it to say that both the Bektashis and the Freemasons survived the purges. And then they had to meet underground. They had to be very secretive about what they did. In 1952, there were about 30,000 unorganized Bektashis in Turkey. Early in 1954, Istanbul police interrupted a Bektashi meeting as an illegal gathering. Fast forward 1987, I received a letter on April 30th, 1987, from a Turkish Masonic leader, Brother Mehmed Fuad Akib. And he explained to me that after the passage of the 1925 law, they continue to work in special lodges in order not to disturb Ataturk. Another place where the Bektashis have been quite prominent is in Albania. At the time of the Turkish conquest, most Albanians were nominal Christians. We say this, there was very few Protestants there. They were generally Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And there were a lot of Muslims, more than any European country, but most of them were Orthodox Sunnis, but there were quite a few Bektashis as well. And they played a very important role in the history of Albania. During the 1930s, new Albanian techies were established in smaller centers as well. Many Albanian Bektashis were involved in the Young Turk movement. They believed the avowed purpose of the Young Turks was conducive to their own national development. And Albanian religious groups enjoyed relative autonomy from the time of independence in 1921 until the communists seized power in November 1944. And things were very unpleasant during that time, years following. And eventually, I believe in 1967, the so-called Cultural Revolution, Albania claimed to have achieved the world's first atheist state and to have completely eradicated religion. Nevertheless, religion operated underground in Albania, with secret celebrations of Christian and Muslim festivals, no doubt held in private homes. There's one unconfirmed report, and I don't remember what year it was, that a Catholic priest baptized a baby and as a result was put to death. And obviously they got out there. Some Bektashis left Albania and established a community in Egypt. And some came to the United States. And on the 24th of October 1953 at St. Andrews Hall in Detroit, plans were made for the first Bektashi techie in America under the leadership of Baba Recep Ferdi, who faced much opposition and misunderstanding. And I've read the biography of this man. He was certainly an outstanding individual. Some insulted him by suggesting he shave his beard and abandon his religious garb or to find work in a factory. Nobody should be expected to do that. Nevertheless, his community was able to purchase a German farm in Taylor, Michigan, which is near the Detroit airport. On the 15th of May, 1954, the techie formally opened. The farm provided income for the techie, with the founders paying African Americans to sow the fields with alfalfa, soybeans, and corn. I have no information on this, but because the Nation of Islam, the Moorish Science Temple, and other African American Muslim groups are so prominent in Detroit, I just wonder if any of these African Americans who work for the Bektashis happen to be Muslim. There probably were some of them, but I can't say for sure. And Baba Recep wrote a book, Islamic Mysticism and Bektashiism, published in 1970, but dated 67, the year of the greatest destruction of religious institutions in Albania. It was dedicated not only to Bektashis, but also to other Sufis, Sunnis, Roman Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox clerics in Albania who sacrificed for its freedom and independence. In May of 1974, the 20th anniversary of the techie was celebrated. For the remainder of his highly productive life, Baba Recep remained a very dedicated pastor. He always visited the sick in the hospital. There are many accounts of him entering the hospital room, coming to the bedside of the person there. Would he put his hand on the head of that person, calm and peacefulness filled the room. whether you were a Bektashi, a Sunni, or of some other faith, Christian, Orthodox, whatever, Catholic, whatever, he would pray for you. And he was loved by all. Many accounts, because of his prayers, the person survived. And as Albania moved toward democracy after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, the first public service was conducted by a Catholic priest for a crowd of 5,000 Catholics and Muslims in a cemetery in Skadora, Albania, in November of 1990. Authorities arrested the priest, but Catholics and Muslims surrounded the building where it was held and forced his release. And so there's the following Sunday, he conducted Mass. Reportedly 50,000 people were present. In December 1990, the Albanian law against public practice of religion was repealed. And many Bektashis in America had family members in Albania, including Baba Reksab, who passed away on the 10th of August, 1995. Speakers at his funeral included Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and Sunni, as well as Bektashi leaders. His biographer stated, "I was deeply honored that Baba had chosen to be buried in Michigan and thereby make our land sacred. Every year on August 10th, we held a special memorial for Baba. He continues to be the light of the techie." And so this organization still exists. The end of communist rule in Albania made the possible return of Freemasonry to this East European country. And the Grand Lodge of Albania was born in a consecration ceremony, 14th of October 2011. And they seem to be doing well. And I've not been able to determine if they have any Bektashis among their members, but they probably do. And contemporary Bektashi scholar Muhammad Al-Ahari, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, we're friends on Facebook, he says the Shriners concocted legends claiming initiation from the persons dissimilar to the Grand Sheikh of Mecca. And while it can be said that many 19th century Shriner, 19th century Turkish Freemasons were of Bektashi upbringing, the influence was going in the wrong direction. It was the Masons who influenced many later Bektashis and not vice versa. But the Bektashi Dervishes have played an important role in the mythical history of the shrine. Few Shriners know anything at all about this fascinating order. Shrindom has never existed in Turkey, Albania, or any of the countries with a Bektashi presence outside of North America. And while Freemasonry and Bektashiism are separate institutions, the common interest in arcane subjects and support for democracy, religious toleration, can help explain that there's inevitably some similarities. Two have interacted in the past and will probably continue to interact in the future. Such dialogue, no doubt, will be mutually beneficial. So, again, 33 years ago today, I received in the mail a letter from a Masonic leader in Turkey. It's what I needed to complete a paper on the Bektashi Order of Dervishes due at Baylor the next day. The research I did in the 1980s, I combined with some later research and updates to produce an article for Luxi Tenebras that was published 2 years ago. And I'm thankful for this. fascinating organization, and perhaps in the future I'll have an opportunity to expand this into a greater volume. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. God bless you. Have a great evening.